When I walked out of the Jeffersonville City Jail, I knew one thing for certain, and that's my wife was going to be pissed. The night before, I had performed a ritual that I had done on the anniversary of 9/11 ever since I got back from Iraq in 2007. And that was a shot of bourbon for each of my 3 most dearest fallen comrades. The first shot of bourbon was Maker's Mark, and it was for Bill Wood, who loved Maker's Mark. Bill died in Dora, Iraq in 2005. The second shot of bourbon was Woodford, which is my favorite bourbon, because Joe Fenty didn't like to drink bourbon. He died on a mountaintop in Afghanistan in 2006. Joe was my dearest friend. And then my last shot of bourbon was Basil Hayden, because it's so smooth. And Freeman Gardner died so young on the streets of Amaria, Baghdad in 2007. I finished my shots and I had a couple beers and I sat and thought, and I said to myself, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive it into the Ohio River so I can be with my dead friends in Valhalla. Of course, a policeman stopped me and put me in jail. That's the reason why I was in jail. So the next morning when I got out, I called home, and my wife answered, didn't let me say a word. She said, you're going to therapy. What she didn't say, but strongly inferred, is that you're going to go to therapy now, or you're never going to see me or your daughter again. My wife had long said that I had PTSD, that when I went to Iraq that I changed, and when I got back from Afghanistan in 2011 that I had gotten worse. Now, my wife is a PhD psychologist. She's the director of behavioral health at Fort Knox, Kentucky, in charge of all the behavioral health at Fort Knox. And so they diagnose people with PTSD. And I said, honey, what do you know, right? I said, it's perfectly normal to freak out with your back to the door because you can't see behind you. It's normal to look at every passerby to see if they have a weapon in their hand or if they're a threat. And it's normal to have your friends who had died in combat revolve through your mind in an endless cycle of despair. And it's normal to every now and then think about putting a gun to your head and pulling the trigger. Now, I did not have PTSD. I didn't believe in it. You don't go to war and serve your country and get sick. Particularly a colonel who had been in the Army at the time 28 years and had prepared his entire adult life to serve in combat. But I went to therapy because I felt that if I didn't, I knew I would lose my wife and my daughter. Now, there's 3 things that I learned whenever I was in therapy. First is that I needed it. I was on this downward spiral of self-destruction. I needed to do something. The second is that it helped. That my therapist gave me cognitive tools to help mitigate the challenges that I had, particularly with anger. And 3, that it wasn't quite enough. One day I was talking to a fellow colonel who said a derogatory comment about one of my buddies, and I went after him. And I got pulled back and before I could do anything, and I got in trouble, bad trouble. And it looked like I was going to possibly leave the Army in dishonorable conditions. It was about that time that my psychiatrist said, hey, Fred, have you tried medication? Now, that was another red line for me. I said, I can do it myself. I'm a soldier. I'm self-disciplined. But obviously, the situation I had with that colonel proved otherwise. And I was, again, in a now or never moment of, if I don't do something, then, I could leave the Army in a bad way. And when I first took the pills and the medication, ironically, it was just like a firefight. There is nothing that brings greater clarity than the snap of a bullet by your head and its impact 2 inches away. And that clarity is followed by the slowing down of the world so you can see it in its full spectrum. You can anticipate dangers. And then you apply your training to do your work. Well, that pill provided me the clarity and the slowing down, and the therapy gave me the tools that I needed to make the right decisions. And after a while, my buddies, I remember them only whenever I wanted to. They weren't, revolving in my head. And, shooting myself was a ridiculous notion that never entered my mind again. And then one morning, I woke up after an awesome night's sleep, and I'm laying next to my wife, and which is something we'd never do, pillows propped up, drinking coffee. And I look over to her, and I touch her, and I say, so this is what it's like to be really normal. And she says, yes. And now I have this awesome job in this greatest city in the world, doing the thing that I love most, and that's bringing art to the people and the places that need it most. And I feel incredibly blessed, remarkably happy, and incredibly normal. And I thank God every day for that night in the Jeffersonville jail and for the cop that pulled me over. I thank God for my wife who had the courage to give me that ultimatum. And I thank God for giving me the clarity to make the right decision in my now or never moments. Thank you guys very much for listening.
I thought that was just an excellent story and an excellent place to start. Fred, can you hear me okay? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Umillard. I should be an expert at Zoom by now with being a school teacher. I got messed up there. Thank you.
No. So I just want to jump right into it because I feel like in a 6-minute story, we get a really good introduction to who you are. So I kind of want to just jump right into it with you. And I want to talk about a theme that I'm seeing in your talk and in your life in general, which is the theme of vulnerability. And I'm drawing on Brene Brown to start this one. And one of the things she said is, no act of bravery isn't first preceded by vulnerability. And it strikes me that your story here is very much rooted in vulnerability. You're sharing a part of yourself that I don't think people like yourself are used to sharing. But you also come out of an Army context where bravery and courage is part of the game, and so too then is vulnerability. And I'm wondering if you could maybe start us off there. We're just jumping right in. What do you think? Oh, did you freeze? I think you froze.
Thank you very much for having me here. I mean, this is an incredible honor, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate this theme, Damn It Life, because I think that's one of the things that, we all have to look inward sometimes. And we talk about vulnerability, and I love that you bring up Brene Brown. Dr. Brown is a huge fan. I've read several of her books. And you're right. And it wasn't until actually I heard of Brene Brown, her speak and talk about vulnerability that I ever really kind of remembered, every time I was in combat and when I was put in a position where I had to make a decision that was going to potentially be dangerous, I was vulnerable, but I had to put myself in that position to get to the next level. And I think what I've learned most through my storytelling life, after I got out of the Army and all the things that I've experienced, is that the start point is vulnerability. The start point is recognizing that you don't have all the answers and that you have to open yourself up, to the outside, but also to the inside. You have to be vulnerable enough to say to yourself, I don't have all the answers. Where am I going to get them? How can I find them? Because ultimately, we want to be our best selves, and we can't do that without starting with that aspect of vulnerability. So I really appreciate the fact that you start with Brene Brown and this notion of vulnerability.
Yeah. So the story itself, can you tell us, what are you thinking now as you're hearing yourself telling the story? What's standing out to you? Because this has to be kind of an interesting experience to be having a room full of people hearing a story that you told and hearing it in a different context. So what's standing out to you now?
Well, this week, March 22nd, is the anniversary of Sergeant Freeman Gardner's death. Sergeant Gardner was a 22-year-old, actually he was 26-year-old, newlywed from Little Rock, Arkansas. He was in the battalion that I commanded, and he was just an incredible human being. I remember Freeman. He's one of those soldiers that stood out, and he was just a great guy. And we were on a mission. We were getting ready to do a raid in Baghdad, and we're getting ready to conduct this operation. But he was killed on March 22nd. So it was just 4 days ago that he was killed. And the circumstances of his death, which are a huge part of the story.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. You lost your sound. Oh. And he froze. All right. Give it a second. There you go. You're back.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Freeman, we were on a mission, and Freeman got killed at an order that I had given. And once he was killed, it was a clearing mission. He got out. He didn't have to get out of the vehicle. He was a commo specialist. He got out of the vehicle, pulled security for his buddies. We set up. He got an IED, went off and killed him instantly. They cleaned up his body and they brought it back to the aid station where we were at. And as we do before, we send off a fallen comrade, we all get around, all the leaders get around and say goodbye to the soldier. And so I'm there and I'm the leader, and we're there, and I say, a few words, and I bend down and I kiss Freeman's forehead. And when I look up, I see the company commander that I gave the order to, who actually came back to me and said, sir, we shouldn't conduct this mission. And I realized at that point, I said, this is all my fault. I said to myself, this is all my fault. And that kind of stayed with me throughout the years. And so, Freeman went home, we sent him home to his mother, Farrah Ratcliffe. And then I wrote that letter that commanders do to the mother. And, then I got back to business. Well, about a month later, I get a letter from Freeman's mother, and it's sitting on my desk in Baghdad. And when I came off a mission, and I don't want to open this. I don't want to open this letter because I know she had to be grieving, and I was afraid the grief had turned to anger. And I opened it, and I was not prepared for what she said. And what she said was essentially, Lieutenant Colonel Johnson. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and she says, Freeman died doing what he loved. He was my number one son, and God bless you and everyone that you command. And that was pretty much the sum. And I put that letter down, and I just shut my door and I just cried for a long time, And so every year now, on the anniversary of Freeman's death, I email his mom, and she emails me back, and we have a little conversation, and we just got done with that correspondence. So that's kind of the backstory that led me, to tell that story. That was the fact that I believe that I caused his death. It haunted me, for all those years, and that was kind of the backstory.
The haunting, I want to talk about that because it influenced your sense of normal. And I think that that's another theme of your talk that is very poignant to me. Your normal was incredibly self-destructive, and that changed. And so can you talk about how dealing with those very real, the very real burden that you were carrying, about how that helped you readjust your normal?
Yeah, and thank you for that. My normal had been, after I'd gotten back, had been, the coming back from combat, preparing to go to combat, coming back, and then ultimately, the desire to go back. So that was the normal cycle. I was a soldier, and it was either, it was going to war, preparing to go to war, and at that point, moving to positions that I could go. So my normal was a focus on combat, on going back to the war and doing that. When, after my last deployment to Afghanistan in 2014, I had come back and I had taken kind of a cush job, and, and I thought Afghanistan would be my last deployment. And then it got to the point, hey man, I'm starting to miss this. And I'll never forget this situation that I'm very embarrassed to talk about, but I think it needs to be said. I had called my former boss, who was a general, and I said, hey, I'd like to get back to the war. Can you help me? And he said, sure, no problem. I was going to go back, and I was going to work for him in Afghanistan. And I came home that night. My wife and I, were having some challenges, and I had my daughter. She was in high school. And, I went and I was talking to my wife, in our bedroom, and I say, hey, listen,
No. See if it comes back.
You haven't been right since you got back from Iraq. You know, all you think about is going back to the war. You know, I hate you. I wish I could expunge you from my DNA. And you know, at that point, I had a flash of this isn't normal. You know, so that was really I should have taken the cue from my daughter at that point, but I didn't. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't in tune with normal. But I did. I went back and I said, hey, I went back to my boss. I said, I can't deploy. Things aren't right now. It's not right. So I ended up not deploying. It was about a year later that I had the incident at the bridge. So my normal was all kind of out of whack. And it took my wife and my daughter and everybody to vector me back into, hey, dude, you know, I mean, what do you want? And that was kind of my repositioning, if you will, back to a re-entry into normal.
So I want to keep going down this line because, you know, you talk about moral injury and the way in which that then manifests in self-destructive ways. And again, kind of how you brought that to the surface and started dealing with it, which, you know, I mean, you talk about both through taking medication as well as through counseling. But can you kind of go into depth a little bit more about moral injury and what it can do?
Yeah, and moral injury has actually just been introduced. This has been an idea that's been going on since probably the you know, there's a couple of people that have written about it, but it's really, I think it's in fact, it's being introduced possibly into the DSM, the new DSM that's coming out for psychology. But moral PTSD, anytime you have trauma, anybody can have PTSD. I mean, you have a traumatic experience. It has, you know, it changes you, hypervigilance, you know, your reaction, your physical, you know, it's the flight or flight. I mean, so combat, you know, I know very few people that come back from combat that does not have some kind of PTSD, and you can recover from that. You can. Some people don't, but you know, over time you can. Moral injury is more soulful. It's something that you believe you did that went against your values, your moral code. And as it pertained to Freeman Gardner, you know, my reflection back was that is I gave an order that got him killed when I should have listened to his company commander, who, you know, asked me for a little more time to conduct the operation. I should have, maybe if I'd have given him more time, maybe I could have done. So you know, all those things that are questioning your values, and as a leader, you know, you're supposed to do those. I mean, I was a senior leader. So the moral injury, something is more soulful. It's much more difficult to expunge, I mean, to get rid of than, you know, PTSD. Over time, PTSD, you can kind of work your way out of it.
Mm-hmm. So when you eventually kind of get out of the Army and you start to turn to you start to sort things out a little bit, but you also start to say, you know, what can I then bring into the world, right? How can I connect with people? And you know, this is a sort of liberal arts conference, and you have a very interesting liberal arts focus and background. And so, how did you sort of bring these parts of your identity together to help deal with, you know, PTSD and moral injury, as well as to use the arts to do that?
Yeah, well, the first job I had out of the Army was I was a fundraiser for Fund for the Arts here in Louisville. It's the major fundraising organization for our arts programs. And in this job, it was just an incredible job. It was a great opportunity. I was a terrible fundraiser, but I really had enjoyed doing it. But so I got to meet a lot of the arts, you know, people in the community. And one of them that resonated with me most was Kentucky Shakespeare. It's the longest running Shakespeare, free Shakespeare in the Park program in America. I mean, it's a really great program. The people are awesome. Their mission is to bring, you know, Shakespeare to schools, with every zip code. And so I really resonated with them because of my love for Shakespeare. When I was growing up, I had a teacher, Polly Peterson, one of those teachers that, you have, and And she made us memorize, the Macbeth, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last civil recorded time. So, I mean, I remember that from Polly Peterson's, English class at high school. And so I kind of started going to the plays at Shakespeare. And the one play that I had went to was actually Macbeth. And when I was there, in the play, that soliloquy goes, out, brief candle, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player struts and frets his hour upon the stage, then is heard no more. 'Tis a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And I'm at the play, and it's in Central Park of Louisville, which is, this beautiful little place. And I literally got up out of there and I said, that's exactly how I felt when I wanted to end my life. Is that, life was a walking shadow, all those things. I said, wow, Shakespeare spoke to me in that way. And, and I thought of Polly, and I said, Polly, you had something back there in freshman English. And so I reached out to the director of Kentucky Shakespeare, a good friend of mine, Matt Wallace, and Amy Attaway, who was the artistic director. I said, hey, if I could raise the money, could you create a program where you can bring veterans to Shakespeare, and we use Shakespeare as a vehicle to work through some more of the issues, because nobody tells the warrior story better than William Shakespeare. I mean, Henry V, the speech at Agincourt, we few, we happy few, we banded brothers, and he that sheds his blood will be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. I mean, there's nothing that speaks more directly to the warrior's heart than William Shakespeare. And so we raised a bunch of money. I've actually raised more money doing this than I did for the Fund for the Arts, but we raised enough money. And the last guy that gave $1,000 was General David Petraeus, who was one of my commanders when I was in Iraq. He gave $1,000. He says, go after it. And so we created this program, and we started to delve into Shakespeare. And through that dialogue, we started to, we had Vietnam veterans, we had old veterans in Korea, and we started to say, hey, this speaks to us. And so this program still goes on today. I'm not as active in it now because I'm doing other stuff, but the program still goes on today. And they, each summer, they put on a production at Shakespeare in the Park. And, I've been Henry IV, I've been Henry V, I've been Macduff, it's just been Mark Antony, it's been really great.
So it strikes me that how challenging was it to get veterans to try this? Because, this might run afoul of certain kind of expectations of how one, operates as a military veteran. But what was the challenges you faced there in breaking through those sorts of stereotypes?
It is breaking through the language of Shakespeare and what the mystique of Shakespeare. I think a lot of people are afraid of it because of the language, but the beautiful thing that Amy Attaway, who was our leader in this, taught us, Shakespeare is to be listened to. Don't worry about reading it. Let's just listen to it. And she taught us how to listen to it. And as we listened to it, it broke down those barriers. So the big part. What I did is trying to market this and recruit veterans in. And our height, we had about 20 some veterans, and it's gone in and up throughout the years. Is that I would give we'd give the Agincourt speech. He that sheds his blood with me will be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. And strip these sleeves and show these scars and say these wounds we had on Christmas Day. So we talk about, hey, this is warrior stuff. And so once they made the connection, hey, this Shakespeare, if we break this down, so, we did, Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, Macbeth, Henry IV, 1 and 2, and then Henry V. As we delved into that text and we started to talk about our experiences, one of the big ones is with Mark Antony, when Julius Caesar was dead, and he went over and, pardon me, thy bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood, thou at the ruins of. That was exactly how I felt whenever Freeman died. When I was, when we were sitting around Freeman, and I kissed his forehead, and I thought in my mind, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find the people that killed Freeman, and we're going to get busy, and we ended up getting in our vehicles and we went out and doing, to search for that. Fortunately, nobody else got hurt. But I felt that exact same way that Mark Antony felt over Julius Caesar's body, who was, Julius Caesar was his mentor. So when you make these very, textual connections with words, and then you have this conversation, it's incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful.
Yeah, why do you think stories have a therapeutic power? Because that's what I hear you saying, right? Why do you think connect? Because this is the thing with and we have a lot of literature people in the room, right? Sometimes we get caught trying to defend literature. Oh, it's just a story. What's that? What's that? Why do you think this has a power to do real healing?
Yeah, I'll never forget my dad, who was an incredible storyteller. My dad owned a bar in Southern Illinois, and stories were everything. I mean, you go to a bar, and I'm not, trying to, promote drinking or anything, but you go to a bar and you tell stories. And my dad used to say, son, it's not the money or the toys you have at the end of your life, it's the stories that you can tell. And, that stuck with me. And as I reflect back on, my storytelling journey, through writing and through onstage storytelling, it's being able to put your life together in a Joseph Campbell kind of hero's journey way, because every story that's worth its salt has is the hero's journey, is that arc, right? And when you tell and craft a story, I mean, I'm in a deliberate way. We tell stories, we're telling stories right now, but when you try to craft one in a deliberate way, there's got to be that, that conflict, that time that, and you get the finding of a mentor and the resolution and the reentry back in. I mean, every story has that, but every healing journey has the same thing. You got to have a mentor. For me, my healing journey was my wife saying, hey, you got to get this fixed. My daughter saying, hey, you got to get this fixed. My buddy saying, hey, you ain't right. You're not right. So, just kind of take the mentor, and that is any person that redirects you towards the greater good, and the greater good, of course, is living the best life, So that, that's why I think storytelling is it's fascinating. And with my work in middle school, I've started a storytelling program, and I teach it at a school, a great school, but it's in a inner city public school. At one time was the most, had more homicides than any other zip code in the United States. But the storytelling class that I have is helping the kids through that. It's, I have not mastered this yet, and I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm seeing the kids being able to tell their stories, working through things as well. And if I serve, my role as a mentor and as a teacher and as a coach, then, maybe I can help them in the same way that storytelling has helped me.
You keep talking about that, because that's really interesting, about the ways in which you have now kind of taken the role that others have taken in your life, which is to encourage them to be, to put their stories to the surface. What have you learned about people, veterans, your students? What have they taught you about stories and storytelling, the stories that you think or anything like that? What, as in your role now, is kind of trying to use storytelling as a means to wellness. What are you seeing, and what are you learning from others in this process?
I told one of the best things that ever happened to me, aside from meeting my wife and having my daughter, and is this opportunity that I now have as a public school teacher. And this came at it kind of a roundabout way. And I'm going to answer your question, but I think, the story of how I got into teaching has led me, to literally see through the eyes of children again and their stories, which it has been, it's been life-changing. But, I was, when I got out of the Army, I wasn't a very good fundraiser. I was not good at asking people for money. I loved the arts, but I wasn't really good at it, at asking for money. So I ended up, literally, failing at a couple jobs. And so I had said when I got out, I never want to be in the military again. I don't want to be associated with it. I want to try and make it on my own. But it had gotten to the point that I had really gotten, it had gotten bad. And so I took a job as a contractor which is a lot of military senior people like myself do. And you can make a lot of money as a military contractor. And for me, it had zero job satisfaction. I mean, I made a lot of money, but I hated going to work every day. And so I was, I was at work one day, and I had read online that Louisville had a shortage of teachers. And so I went on Facebook, like everybody does, and you say, hey, well, if I wish I could be a teacher, I'd do it right now, and thinking of whatever. And some guy came back, hey, so listen, Kentucky's got this option where if you're a veteran with 6 years of service and a bachelor's degree, you can get a alternative emergency certification since they're so short. I said, there's no way. Well, I found out it was true. So I called up, and they said, yeah, come on up, bring your transcripts. I was certified to teach in a single day. So I didn't have to take any other education, any other tests or anything. And I was teaching in middle school 2 weeks later. And, so I quit my job at, Booz Allen, making a lot of money, and I'm a school teacher. And so I walk into the first day of school, and it's a gymnasium, and we're ready to pick up all the kids. And it's like the noise is like deafening. I feel like I'm in a rock concert in a closet. And all of a sudden, these kids were running at me, and they're running around. And I look at myself, and I think to myself, I said, my God, what have I done? And but that was 3 years ago, and now here I'm 3 years into it. I'm at an incredible school. It's a Mazik Middle School, which is a science magnet here, again in a very at-risk neighborhood, but it brings in some of the best students in the city, and also has our challenged marginalized group of kids that we come together. And so I hear stories. We're also one of the most diverse schools in the city, and in fact the state. So I'm starting to see and hear stories from these kids that opened my eyes to to things that I had never thought of, that could happen. I was the other day, I was in class, and I was talking about trying to tell a funny story about combat and getting shot at, and how it was, and the kids looked at me and says, getting shot at? What's the big deal about that? That happens all the time in my neighborhood, And I said, stop, So for the rest of the class, that's all we talked about. I said, what do you mean? Let's talk about that, So I'm learning about things that I would never have known existed had it not been for being a school teacher. But through their stories, I am gaining not only more empathy, I am seeing, what can I do with my privilege? What can I do to help, to do greater work? And it's through their stories that I'm starting to make that connection. And had I not started teaching at this school and meeting these kids, I would not know some of these stories. And that's just one of many very similar sort of instances.
I want you to drill down a little bit more on your choice of, post-military profession. And you mentioned it. You could be making a lot of money as a retired Army colonel at Booz Allen, as you said, but you chose to be a middle school teacher. I don't think that's something that most people think retired Army colonels go and do. But you've told me that it couldn't be a more perfect place for you to be right now. And it strikes me that, there's a difference between a job, which is something that you pick to do to, kind of meet certain material expectations, or a vocation which chooses you, right? And there is something about you, Fred Johnson, that is designed to be doing this, and you are now living into your vocation. Can you expand upon that and talk about how this unlikely career trajectory is actually quite in line with who Fred Johnson is?
Yeah. In the military, you were particularly if you're an officer or a non-commissioned officer, if you serve you are a teacher. I mean, you have to train. We call it training, but it's teaching. And it's we talk about what that means, but it's teaching. It's imparting, knowledge to develop skills. So it's kind of a natural fit. But to me, it's much deeper than, I mean, you know, teaching is not delivering content. Let me qualify that. Delivering content, when you say, okay, this, you know, in Mansa Musa was a great leader because of, you know, whatever, but being able to connect the student with learning and their potential, that's the art form. And, you know, a lot of times I feel, you know, I'm not a cheerleader, but I'm in a position where I am trying to create the conditions for self-confidence, for self-esteem, for belief in oneself. And that is a very powerful and dangerous if you don't do it right. And sometimes I mess it up. I'm afraid I mess it up every day. And that is part of, you know, that's a fragility as an educator that you have to deal with. And you just got to pray that you're doing it right. But when you see that light come on, when you see, I tell the kids, you know, if you're not, you know, making yourself better or the world better every day, then you're wasting your time. You know, be kind, let's coexist, you know, love one another. What are we doing? And, you know, and then when you see a child who may have been struggling with anger or whatever, one day to stop and say, you know, you could see they're getting ready to do something that was, you know, off task or, you know, misbehavior, and they stop and they react instead of respond. You think, okay, maybe this is working. There's nothing more powerful in this world. There's nothing. I mean, you give me $1 million. I wouldn't. You couldn't pay me $1 million to quit this job. You know, because of that spark that you see. And I mean that literally. My wife would kill me. Oh, you need to take that, you know, $1 million. But no, this is worth every. I love what I do because of that spark.
Yeah, you seem to be somebody who's driven by a sense of curiosity. And so I just think back to your example of you're in a class discussion and the student is like, yeah, you know, flying bullets, that's part of my reality. And that's not part of my reality. You know, it was for you, but in a very different context. And what you did was you got curious, right? You said, okay, to get back to the theme, somebody's normal is very different from my normal. I'm not going to understand this unless I break down some barriers and try to step into the space. And to do that, I need to be curious. I need to stop and listen and truly hear. You seem to be somebody who, through all of your different stages, has been driven by a sense of curiosity. Sometimes it's more subdued than others, but I'm hearing that coming out. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that and what that, you know, insight might have you might be able to go on.
Yeah, you know, the idea of curiosity, you know, contextualized to inquiry, right? In our social studies standard, I'm a social studies teacher. In our social studies standards, it's inquiry-based learning. So it's based on questions. And, you know, and Dr. Rimlard, I don't know if you just we just kind of mind meddled, but yesterday we were doing a question formulation technique kind of thing. And it hit me as we were doing this, you know, this is, you know, what every human being should do. You know, we're doing this in a formalized way in class where, you know, we have a big question, you know, what causes change in civilization? And I asked the students, okay, create all the questions you have about this one question. And let's and that will help us create our curriculum, you know, will guide our instruction around those questions. And 9 times out of 10, it's always those same questions are the same ones adults who created the curriculum came up with as well. But sometimes, quite frankly, the kids come up with much better ones. You know, for instance, we were doing one yesterday, you know, how were the Christian and Muslim responses to the plague similar or different? And one kid saying, you know what, the Christians and Muslims, we did the same thing with COVID, you know, and they're making these connections, right? And these are 12-year-olds. And I was, after class yesterday, I'm reflecting, I said, you know, we got to do this every day. You know, I mean, I've got to personally do this every day. And I think, you know, some of us do this, you know, we do it sometimes intuitively, but if we are more deliberate about our questioning and our inquiry into everything, I think we'd be, you know, and do it in deliberate ways. I think we would resolve a lot of problems that, you know, we're experiencing in the world right now. And I see this with our students in these inquiry-based, you know, based learning models and modalities that we're implementing.
So I like this idea of building curriculum. Now you are a middle school teacher, you're building curriculum. Obviously, the liberal arts has a big role in this. So this is a conference that is meant to celebrate the liberal arts. You are a person of broad learning and broad background in many different ways, but I see the liberal arts as being integral in forming the person that you are. Help us, okay? Help us make a pitch for the liberal arts. And I just want you to think about, you went to Wofford, right? College?
Yep, went to Wofford, a liberal arts school in Spartanburg, South Carolina. You've
got a career in the military. How do we make a pitch? How do we make the liberal arts something that everybody can see as being valuable in the education of the human person?
What an amazing question. And I think the start point is with the word art. So if liberal, the conventional liberal, the liberal that really, in my opinion, matters, and art. You make the connection between those two words, but with it all juxtaposed around art, because art is that thing that is the spark of creativity. We did a lesson. I started a lesson the other day on the Michelangelo painting of the creation of Adam. Where God is coming in and is barely touching. And these are kids. They don't know Michelangelo. They and they don't know. They see two naked guys and they kind of get fixated on that for a second. I said, come on, let's bring it back here. What does this mean? No other thing. I said, what is this? What's this? And one of the students said, it's almost as if I could see the spark in between their fingers. And I said, tell me more about that. What do you mean by spark? He says, well, that's, it looks like Adam over there is kind of like dull. And we know what happens later, right? He becomes a man and, and all this kind of stuff. But I see a spark. And so in using, literal art, Michelangelo, this creation, Adam, and what that brings in, I mean, that's, to me, that's what liberal arts is. I mean, that's the power of humanities, is that spark. And I tell the kids all the time, I say, hey, I want you to learn math. I want you to learn science. I want you to learn, proper grammar structure. But what I want you to learn is where does this all tie together? How does it make a difference in your life? Not only, as an adult, but right now, how do you make those connections? So again, that lesson, that lesson was really a powerful lesson. When that young lady said, when a young 12-year-old, it seems like I could see a spark. Where did she get that from? It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. But it seems like one of your projects is that you want people, right? Whether it's the veteran dealing with PTSD, whether it is that middle school student, whether it's that person in the military or whatever, we want them to know that they matter, right? Because I think we live in a world where sometimes people can feel like they're disposable or left behind or not consequential. But that exercise of saying, you have a spark. Every single one of you has a unique spark that makes you you. It seems like bringing that out is something that you're very much focused on.
Yeah, and it gets back to when you ask why did I give up this really lucrative career as a military contractor, and why am I going into the cafeteria smelling mozzarella sticks and nachos?
He's out again. I'm trying to get the camera on the crowd here since we're.
And you're a part of that impetus that leads to the flame or to connection. What's better thing in the world, right? There's nothing better.
So I'm gonna turn it over to the audience. I tried to get the camera so you can see we got a nice full room here. So do we have questions for Fred? Denise?
Oh, I was just waving at him. I have an off topic slightly. It's just the first question that comes to mind. A lot of us in here are college professors. What do you think is the hardest thing about teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question, because my wife's she's an does a second. She's an adjunct at the University of Louisville here, and so we kind of trade. We started trading, like, okay, what's the hardest thing that you're doing? I mean, the bottom line for me, seventh grade is classroom management. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know if you guys have to deal with that, but God love these kids that have been in mass. They haven't been able to see or connect for the last 18 months, and they now, we're off mass now. But when they came back in, man, it was like game on. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I control all this? That was the biggest part. That was the hardest thing for me. It still is to this day. Is God love him, man.
Yeah. I think we've all seen that. At all of our levels. It's been tough. Other questions? Hey, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of go off that previous question, I'm curious, how do you think your skill set as a colonel lent yourself toward the education aspect, with that idea of having experience, being able to be certified so quickly?
Yeah, and I tell you, I get a lot of flack. I mean, if you will, why didn't you have to go through the same, things that we had to go through? I know I value the extra education. I mean, I know I say it all the time. I didn't go to that extra, training, but what we, in terms of content delivery, how we deliver, the content so it connects, the standards and the objectives of learning with the student. We do that throughout our career. I mean, that is, I was a basic training battalion commander where I took, young 18-year-old men and women and transformed civilians into warriors. That's a hard transition. And, we had a fairly significant attrition rate. So, I knew how to teach. The hard part was learning how to how to do that at a middle school level. But I think the big thing is, more than anything, and you as professors know this better than anyone, is you're leaders. Yes, you're professors. Yes, you're PhDs. Yes, you have advanced degrees, but you are leaders, and you are leading young men and women in the attainment of their potential, their academic potential, their potential. So, leadership is the cornerstone of what a military person does. I mean, that's bottom line. At the end of the day, anyone that's in the Army for more than 6 years, you don't make it that far unless you're a leader. And so throughout my career in the Army, I was in 30 years. 6 years of that time was spent in leadership schools. I'm an Army Ranger, so I went through the hardest Army training for leadership. I'm an airborne. I've jumped out of airplanes, which is leadership. I've gone to the War College and learned. So it's just the same thing. Me as a seventh grade teacher, you as professors at St. Francis University, we're leaders. And that's what I bring to the table. It's not necessarily I'm a great social studies. I have all this academic knowledge on social studies. I'm a leader. You are leaders.
So I just want to he said that he was overseeing basic training, and Fred will probably appreciate this. I did 12 weeks in Paris Island when I was 18 years old. So from August until November, I am currently, I'm 48 years old. I still have dreams and/or nightmares that I'm back in boot camp. You cannot understate how much of an impact that leaves on a person. That all these years later, it's still there in terms of identity formation and all these other things. So. I just think that's a really interesting insight that you have. Other questions? Please, in the back.
So I'm a student at Baruch University, and in one of my classes, one of my teachers said that liberal arts or humanities is the education necessary for a free person. What is your idea on that?
Review that.
That liberal arts is the education necessary for a free person?
Correct.
Is that the question that I heard?
Yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you enter my classroom, it says that you in this classroom we reside in this room. We reside in a democracy, and so my social studies and inquiry is built around a democratic process, and you can't have that in any other, in my opinion, type of curriculum other than liberal arts. Because of you want to have the dialogue, but you also are required to, the diversity makes it so much more rich. So I believe that 100%. I don't think we can have a democracy without liberal arts and the humanities. I can't imagine. I don't see how it happens. We can have great scientists, we can have great mathematicians and engineers and politicians, but if we can't think, in terms of a liberal arts framework or humanities framework, how can you have discussion? How can you have dialogue? I think that may be part of the problem, is that we don't have enough of it.
Fred, I really liked hearing about your passion for working with veterans using Shakespeare, and I love hearing about your passion teaching your students. And I was wondering, I know a social studies that you teach, right, 7th grade level. Do you ever get a chance to work Shakespeare at all in some of your lessons with your students?
Well, I'm getting ready to right now because we're starting the Renaissance. So I'm going to introduce them to Shakespeare after spring break. So I am going to, begin that introduction at spring break. And again, I'm still kind of feeling out my way. I have a lot of ideas that I'd like to introduce to the administration on how we can, with storytelling, specifically this class that I've kind of created, and with Shakespeare and with drama as well. But really Shakespeare, I really want to see if we can make this connection. And I know 7th graders are not going to want, or 8th graders are going to hear this, but I think I just like to see it works.
What do you think? Just intuition. What do you think is going to connect?
I think the comedies. I think I think the comedies can connect. I've really got to go back to my mentor at Shakespeare and kind of, because they do a children's program in the city. We just haven't done anything in the thing. So, but I'm going to be interested. I'm going to go back to her and ask her, hey, what do you think I could do to make this more effective? I really don't know, because it was a challenge. It took a while with veterans, to make that breakthrough. Mm-hmm. If you guys have any recommendations, please let me know, because I'll try about anything.
Think of much ado about nothing with like texting and tweeting behind each other's backs.
That's beautiful. I'm going to write that down. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Because we actually study much ado about nothing here, texting and all the little gossip and all the, I think you're 100%. I'm writing that down right now. Beautiful. Thank you. I got more out of this than y'all. See how it works.
Yeah, so I have a question. So it seems like after your military career, you've been focused on breaking down stigmas, and the way that you've been doing that is through storytelling, right? You broke down stigmas about PTSD, then you broke down stigmas about Shakespeare and about the arts. What suggestions would you have for people who maybe aren't at the point where they're comfortable storytelling, where they're comfortable talking, but they still maybe need a stigma broken down for them?
My start point has, thank you for that question. My start point has always been writing. I published a book, 5 Wars, a Soldier's Journey to Peace, which actually took me 10 years to write. And almost all the stories that I have told on stage are captured in that book, and I'm, so I think journaling is, and I have my kids do that because I have a lot of kids who will not do the storytelling, but I'll give them the old composition book, journals. I said, just write it down. I'm not going to look at it. It's yours. I'm going to keep it over here. You can get it out anytime. Anytime you have a thought, just start writing it down. So I think everything starts with a thought, and then, you know, if you're not inclined to do it verbally, then do it in writing. You know, so I've been using that a lot as well.
Any other questions?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, I think it's frozen too.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Any other questions? That's good timing because we're out of time. We've held Fred long enough. Let's give Fred Johnson a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Give you a last word. Any pieces of advice or anything that we can remember you with?
Now, I just want to thank you for having me and being able to share our stories. I wish I was there physically and for us to be able to connect with one another directly. But this is, you know, you're talking about normal. This is part of the new normal. And I'm blessed and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And you know, you like I said, you gave me much ado about nothing in texting. Man, I got enough to think about now. So I appreciate you all and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.